All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the annual II Graduate Student Lightning Talks. We would like to give a special welcome to our prospective students who are joining us today as part of the MIRS Preview Days. It is our hope that this event offers you an insightful look into what our students are actually doing as part of our programs, and to help illustrate the breadth and experiences across MIRS and the International Institute. My name is Charlie Polinko, and I am joined by my colleague Briahna Anders. Um, we are the academic advising team for the Masters in International and Regional Studies program at the LSA International Institute. And we have had the great privilege of working with the students on today's panel and are very interested and impressed with the work that they have done on their capstone projects and in their research. In addition to our visiting students, we'd also like to thank the faculty and staff and students from the various II centers who are here to show support for our students and colleagues. One of the strengths of MIRS is the opportunity to grow connections and collaborations across the II, and your participation in events like this are a significant part of how we accomplish this. We have 4 exceptional students eager to share about their research and educational journeys, but first we'd like to go over a few housekeeping points. Please note that this event is being recorded and it will be shared via the II's YouTube page. We ask that attendees keep microphones muted throughout today's programs to minimize any disruptions for our presenters. After each speaker, we will have time for you to ask questions. Feel free to write your question in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll address them all at once at the end. Or if you'd prefer, once we start the Q&A, we will invite you all to use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and we'll call on people to ask their questions directly to the presenter. With that, we're ready to move to the main event, which is our student speakers. Our first speaker this morning is Lilit Gizhlaryan. Lilit is a second-year student in the Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies specialization. Her work in MIRS is centered on subnational research in the South Caucasus, post-Soviet studies, and grassroots mobilization. As an international student from Armenia, Lilit is the recipient of a Fulbright Foreign Student Fellowship and has received numerous other fellowships from the Center for Armenian Studies, the Weiser Center for Emerging Democracies, the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies, the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies as well. Please join me in welcoming Lilit for her talk, Theorizing a Region from Field Research to Scholarly Framework. Lilit, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here and share my experience as a MIRS grad student. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for those who are from the International Institute for your continuous support. So if I can have the next slide, please. I will start about my journey. So I joined the MIRS program in 2023, as Charlie already mentioned, as a foreign Fulbright student from Armenia. I specialize in the center in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies. And before coming to U of I was working in the South Caucasus on cross-border projects, conflict resolution and peace building oriented. And I was involved in a big research project on the border with Armenia and Turkey. So I already knew that I want to work and write on Armenia-Turkey relations, but I wasn't really quite sure yet what dimension I'm going to take. So the topic that you are seeing on the screens is now the Armenian-Turkish grassroots trade and its historical grievances, commerce from the 1990s to the present. But there was a long journey to coming to this, narrowing down the topic to this title. And I will be telling you more in the next slides how I came to that. Yep, next, please, Charlie. I will tell a bit about the topic and the questions that I'm exploring in my thesis. It is about the people, the vendors that, despite the societal policing, legal pressures, psychological and technical challenges, are trading together from Armenia and Turkey. And of course, despite the closed borders as well. So the Armenia-Turkey borders have been closed since 1993. There was a short period after the independence in 1991 that it was open for just products. But then after the Karabakh War, it was closed again until and until now, basically. And so I'm exploring the prevailing antagonistic perceptions on the one hand in the societies, and on the other hand, the relationships and the trust building between the people that after the collapse of the Soviet Union started the infrastructure of trade. This is a group of small people, vendors that don't have any political affiliation, but somehow made trade, Armenia-Turkey trade, a big part of Armenia's economy until now. So I engaged in ethnographic qualitative research with interviews with vendors and also policymakers who are involved in the trade with Turkey. I was lucky enough to get some funding and do field visit in Turkey and Armenia. I did participant observation. And I'm combining this with desk research about the history since the 1990s, how the trade developed, but also the subnational research analysis, which I will be talking more on the next slides. And just before we move on to the next slides, I wanted to point out the weird photo that you see on the right side on the screen. You might wonder what it is. This is the border, the current border between Armenia and Turkey. This is the railway that was built in the Tsarist times about 200 years ago. And this has been the Iron Curtain between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world, the Turkish Republic. And now this is the current closed border between the two countries. And if we can have next slide, please. So are we on the next slide? I think, can we? Yes, thank you so much. And so, like I said, it was quite of a journey of almost 2 years to come to the topic and define the topic for me. And there were several courses that really shaped my research and my understanding and my angle of how I want to look into this. So there is one thing that I really appreciated in the MIRS program, and that is the interdisciplinarity of the classes, which means that the classes that are centered by your that are offered by your centers, they do focus on very different aspects of the region that you are studying, both politics, history, culture, arts. So you can really shape your curriculum and choose what you want to learn and what your focus is. On the other hand, you can also take classes from different schools and departments within the University of Michigan. So throughout these 2 years, I took classes at the Public Policy School and the Political Science and Anthropology departments. And there are several courses, as I mentioned, that really, really shaped what I'm doing now. And one of them was the research design class that helped us for about a year to design the topics and really think about the research questions that we have. There was a lot of peer review works, a lot of working together as a group to help each other to define our project. Other classes that I took were on qualitative research methods, ethnographic writing, social activism, and all of this really brought me to my research topic today. Next slide, please. So I want to focus on especially 2 classes that I took that I was thinking, this is it. I want to engage with these topics, and this is what I want to do for my research. And one was the subnational research. I was introduced to the subnational research analysis during the political science qualitative research methods class. And it is really about understanding power structures that are beyond the national level. So usually we have, for example, national level comparative politics, or the analysis that we are doing, it is on the state level, national level. However, subnational research focuses on the smaller elements or smaller regions within the state. And the subnational research believes that in case you start looking into the smaller elements, you won't have a holistic view. And this is what I'm trying to do. And the subnational research does not only focus on geographic areas, but it also focuses on groups of people. And this is what I took for my research. So I took the group of people, the vendors, the Armenian Turkish vendors that work together. And in a way, these are marginalized voices that when we theorize Armenia-Turkish relations, we do not really talk or see the views that they have. And the ethnographic methods also shape my interviews, the interviews that I'm conducting until now. We can have next slide, please. So I already talked about the interdisciplinarity of the classes, but there are several other aspects that I want to mention that the MIRS program was great for, and that is the language learning. So you do have a very deep language learning of the region that you want to study. There are the different events that the different centers organize, and it is really access to participating in different workshops that are hosted by the centers that are within the international institute. Next slide, please. And I will quickly mention about the Center for Armenian Studies as well. Although I'm in the Center for Russian, East European, Eurasian Studies, I was lucky enough to have an Armenian center as well within the International Institute that helped me a lot for both financial support for the field work, for example, but also the access to interdisciplinary research opportunities around Armenian topics and the cultural events as well that they're organizing. So if you come, you can also look into the regions that you are interested in and then participate across the centers as well. Next slide, please. Another experience that I wanted to mention here, if you're interested into pursuing a PhD degree later on, is the graduate student instructor position. This was a great opportunity to design and deliver lectures, discussion sections, course materials as well. And this was really important to build relationship with students and gain mentorship from experienced faculty members. Next, please. And again, if you're interested in PhD, I feel like the MIRS program is a great trampoline in a way that leads you to a PhD program. And I wanted to mention about the conferences as well. I wasn't participating in conferences during my first year, but the second year I did participate in several conferences, and they are a great way to connect with scholars, researchers, professionals in the field to hear their feedback about your work, improve the publishing skills as well, and really see what the bigger academic community stands in general when it comes to the frameworks around your topics. I can have next slide. And I also wanted to end my talk with a couple of tips. I was reflecting on what I would want to have known, or I learned, or I appreciate that I know, and I decided just to put a couple of points here in case you come to Michigan, you come to the MIRS program. Don't take too many classes in the first semester. Explore courses in other schools you're interested in. The School University of Michigan is so big and it has so many opportunities. Start writing your thesis papers early in case you are writing a thesis. You have some other tips there as well. And most important, don't panic. Everyone is a little confused, especially the first semester, but you've got this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lilit. At this point, we have a few minutes, so if anyone has questions and they would like to ask, please either drop that in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand and we will call on you to unmute yourself and ask directly. Okay, we have one question in the chat. Lilit, what did you encounter in your field research and ethnographic methods that you don't intend, or that you didn't intend or originally anticipate?
That's a really good question. I think I need to think for a moment. I think it was really, on the one hand, the openness of people. So when I started my interviews, I was really, nervous. How do I present myself? What am I doing? Especially some of the interviews are now continuing over Zoom, and it's been really, really wonderful to see how engaged my interviewees are with the topic and with me as well. And then it's really very nice and warming how in the end, like they really want me to get a good grade. And they're like, what else can we do for you to do this? And they're introducing me to other people as well. So that has been really great to find kind of this network of people and how they know each other and how it's a small community, but is very interconnected. And they are very willing to give information about others as well and to put me in touch with other people too. So that's been really great.
Great to hear. Are there any other questions, or should we move on to our next speaker? Seeing none, I think we can move on to our next speaker, and I will hand the microphone to Briahna.
Okay, so our next presentation is from Caity Marentette. Caity is a second-year student in the MIRS South Asian Studies specialization. Her research interests include South Asian literature across Indic, Islamicate, and colonial worlds circa 1600 to 2000, language vernacularization and vernacular performance, literary community formation, the history of the printing press, and theories of affect, rasa, and translation. She is a recipient of multiple fellowships from MIRS and the Center for South Asian Studies, including 2 FLAS academic year fellowships, a summer FLAS fellowship, and she also received the Asian Languages and Cultures Student Excellence Award for Hindi. Please join me in welcoming Caity for her talk titled Redirections in Research, Making the Most of Unexpected Situations.
Thank you so much, Briahna, and hey, everybody. And a quick thanks to everybody who has supported my research and also made today's talk possible. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to jump right into my research. I'm into this talk, and this talk is designed as a bit of a research talk. It's as something of an informal exploration of my research and program trajectory and how they change throughout this MA program. So I'm covering about 2 years in 9 minutes. Short disclosure, I am a student who's also taking the thesis track for this MA degree, much like Lilit. So when I started this MA, I had an idea of a thesis project that I thought I could reasonably undertake. But it was only after a couple of semesters of academic coursework, such as, for myself, coursework in philosophy and comparative literature and art history, as well as engagement with the MIRS core curriculum required of every student who is in the MIRS program, like the research design course that was mentioned by Lilit, that I began to concretize my ideas into a coherent project. So after about a year, with the help of a couple, research funding opportunities that MIRS afforded me, I set off to study comparative literary movements in the US and India, specifically looking at the Beat generation and literary movements or literary production among Beats in the US and the members of the Hungryalist generation or the Hungryalist movement in Calcutta, in Kolkata, which is basically a group that, like the Beats, wrote philosophical and avant-garde literature that challenged preconceived notions about societal structure, as well as the colonial canon. So I did that, and I was able to do that largely through the help of two funding pathways, which were made available through MIRS. So for domestic students, there is of course the FLAS fellowship, which I had worked alongside, or which I had applied for, and I ended up ultimately using that. But secondly, there was the International Institute Student Fellowship, the IISF, which is a fellowship pool that would have afforded me a fairly similar research scholarship amount to the FLAS. And the really nice thing about this particular fellowship is that it's afforded to, the pool is something that you can apply to regardless of citizenship. So it's a really great opportunity for international students as well to, obtain summer research funding. And so partnering with what I would say is like the premier American organization for a broad language study of South Asian languages, that is the American Institute of Indian Studies. I have the logo right here. I participated in an 8-week intensive program in Kolkata in India, where I studied 4th-year Bengali. And it was a wonderful experience. Next slide, please. So meanwhile, I had planned to do a little bit of research on the grounds while I was taking on this program. In particular, at a relatively well-known archive called the Kolkata Little Magazine Library and Research Center, and I have a little photo here of the archive front. And what's really nice about this particular archive is that this is really where many Hungryalist publications published in the 60s and 70s in the form of pulp fiction. Or little cheap paperback magazines commonly sold on public bookstalls and whatnot are kept. And there are about 70,000 of these books available at the Little Magazine Library. But then the problem arose, which is to say the Little Magazine Library was, over the several weeks that I was in India, literally never open. So I had, kind of tried to prepare for this. So I had obtained contacts and coordinated meeting times with people who worked within the library. That didn't work. I tried many times, usually several times a week, and I didn't have access to the library. And then I reached out to people who were familiar with the library, and then I learned kind of through them about open hours that didn't necessarily reflect the library open hours that were posted on the website or on Google Maps operating hours. Still had no luck. So 8 weeks came and went, and all I really saw of the library was the photo of the building that I've appended here in this presentation. So my research plans, kind of had to change accordingly. And then I later learned that only after only returning back to the United States, I found out from another contact that the library had permanently closed. And up to this day, there remains, as far as I know, no news on what's going to happen with the archives. And this is just something that, happens, and sometimes you have to be prepared for while you're undertaking international research. Sometimes archives close. And then the question arises, well, what do I do with my research? So I had to rethink my project. Next slide, please. So I'd known that I wanted to work on a literature project, and I'd considered a couple of my other academic interests. I know I really wanted to work with critical theory, for instance, and in particular affect theory. So with the help of my MA advisor, the two of us developed a few ideas, and we started centering on alternative pathways that we could survey, say, for instance, just 1 or 2 works which are publicly available online or might be available through the library. So to put a really novel spin on my project, pun intended, I suppose, I took advantage of the flexibility of the MIRS program. So I redevised my project while changing my sources. I pivoted my research back about 20 years. Instead of focusing on the 60s, I started looking on literature that was produced in the 40s. I looked at a close reading of these two short stories that were written by a Bengali author, a very famous one named Bibhutibhushan Bandyopadhyay. And in particular, I was looking at stories that focus on a practitioner of Tantra named Taranath. So the stories are called Taranath Tantric, both of these stories. And Hindu Tantra and literature is really fascinating for my own research, especially in the realm of affect theory, which is kind of a psychological theory of how emotions surface, because it enabled my project to combine topical research from comparative literature and translation with studies in religion, and in particular religious feelings. So to bring in an innovative edge, I'm now surveying both of these short stories as Gothic literature, exploring how the literary aesthetic and resulting affects of the text weave themselves into a kind of Gothic mood. And all the meanwhile, I've taken advantage of formal and informal opportunities to pick up and use my language skills in Hindi and Bengali. So I take coursework in Hindi and Bengali here at the University of Michigan. And more recently, on an informal basis, I've been picking up Sanskrit and Punjabi. So And I do this, not just to write a good thesis, but also to prepare myself for future academic and professional endeavors. So next slide, please. So what has all of this done for me? First, I've gained exposure to fellowships available at the II and beyond for the duration of this MA program and beyond. In consultation with my MA advisor and other sources at the university, I've also begun to think really long and hard about how my skills and experience abroad, particularly in light of research hurdles and redirections, have prepared me for many situations in the workforce. So for right now, I work for the Center for Armenian Studies, which gives me direct work experience that can be translated into a future career. It's also given me really interesting ways to think about the transmission of literature across spaces, transnationally, internationally. Similarly, MIRS students are required to attend, as Lilit said, several lectures and workshops in their first year, which enable MIRS students to develop connections with, like-minded professionals and academics who can then allow you to pursue many different and perhaps theretofore unthought of professional pathways. And then, lastly, as we're still wrapping up this academic year, I've, been thinking about future graduate study and MA and PhD programs, and the academic background that you get through this program, and particularly the flexibility afforded to you throughout this program, enables you to apply to a myriad of programs, not just in area studies, but in all sorts of different disciplines if you know how to market yourself. So that is my 2 years and 9 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caity. Are there any questions for Caity? I know I have one, but if anyone else has a question, please feel free to drop that in the chat, or raise your hand and we'll call you out to unmute yourself and ask. As we wait for those to come in, I did have a question. Can you talk about how the shifts in your research have also impacted your outlook on your future plans post MIRS?
Yeah. So I started this program as somebody who was, I had considered myself something of an aspiring historian. And I had started this program thinking that I was going to study language movements in Punjab and Bengal. And that's what I did my bachelor's thesis on. So I thought, okay, this is a fairly natural progression. I'm going to just be studying this as a kind of like social historical project. And then by 6 weeks in the program, I was taking this really wonderful philosophy course that introduced me to critical theory for the first time, in an academic setting. And I kid you not, that course was so wonderful. My entire worldview just changed in 15 weeks. In consultation with different people who are in my program, and then, other courses that interested me, the instructors who were leading those courses, I started to realize, well, there's a really organic interest here in literary studies. So originally this MA project was supposed to be my way of, sidling the lines of history and literature. I was going to look at, global literary flows in the 50s to 70s, and then see that as kind of a way of marrying what I did in undergrad with literature. And then, because research panned out the way that it did, I ended up really going all in on this one thing that I'm super passionate about. So it actually, in some ways, it ended up working out really well for me and what I discovered about myself through this program, I think. So that being said, take advantage of the flexibility of this program. Take lots of courses if you can. Lots of courses in different disciplines. Yeah.
That's great to hear. Are there any other questions that we have for Caity? Seeing none, I think we can advance to our next speaker. So our next speaker today is Kenna Kump. Kenna is a second-year dual degree student pursuing the Middle Eastern and North African Studies specialization within MIRS, as well as a master's in public policy from the Ford School of Public Policy here at U of M. Kenna's research examines how refugees and internally displaced persons perceive humanitarian aid based on sponsorship and origin. Kenna has extensive international experience, including work and language training in Jordan, and recently completed a certification course in humanitarian and emergency training through the Global Humanitarian Professionals Program. Please join me in welcoming Kenna for her talk titled Between the Social Sciences and Humanities, Research and Networking as a Dual Degree Student.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank everyone who's zooming in with us today and everyone who will be watching this recording later, especially people that I've worked with personally. So obviously you can see my title here. It's a bit different than the other presentations that are going to happen today. And then if we could click once more. So yeah, my alternative title is What to Do When Your Thesis Becomes More of a Dissertation. Because my thesis kind of grew too big for me to complete in 1 or 2 years. Next slide, please. So this is just some more basic information about me. So I'm a dual degree grad student here, and my email is in the top right corner if you would like to contact me afterwards. Next slide. So I'm in Middle Eastern and North African Studies here in the MIRS program, and I thought about putting a different map in here, but the boundaries of the Middle East and North Africa don't have an agreed upon description. There are no hard boundaries. You could argue a lot of different places belong in the Middle East and North Africa, from Afghanistan to South Sudan to Ethiopia to even Armenia, where Lilit is from. Next slide, please. So this is my broken down CV. As you can see, I went to Utah State for undergrad, and now I'm here at the University of Michigan. And my research and professional experience has been a bit different than other people's because I started my thesis my first year of grad school, looking at how refugees and IDPs perceive humanitarian aid based on who is providing it. And then that grew into a monster. And now I am doing an internship rather than a thesis, because I believe that when I complete a PhD program, I will be able to use my thesis as a dissertation topic. Next slide, please. Oh, and the one after, yeah. So I just wanted to let you guys know how much funding is available for both tuition and research purposes here at the university, because I went to undergrad, small state school in Utah, not a lot of funding compared to the University of Michigan. It was a whole new world. So if you could press twice, please. So the areas in red are sponsorships and funding that I've gotten from the MIRS program and the International Institute, as well as the Center for Middle Eastern and North African Studies. And then if we press once more, the area in blue are fellowships that I've gotten from the Ford School of Public Policy. And I would highly recommend exploring your different options here at the university, as well as any organizations associated with the university, such as the Center for the Empowerment of Women. Next slide. So my research covers a very broad range, but generally falls under like humanitarianism or philanthropy or charity work, where it combines the humanities and the social sciences. I have a weakness for history and anthropology and language learning. So this was a really good program because, as the previous presenters have talked about, there is so much diversity and flexibility. So you can take a multitude of different classes. You can have as much interdisciplinary work as you want, pretty much. And it allows you to just explore topics that you never thought you would be able to in your typical grad program. Next slide, please. So these are just some quick examples of past research. I thought I should give them. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them, but I just want to demonstrate that you can actually dabble in a variety of areas, even if they don't directly relate to your thesis. Next slide, please. So I'll talk more about this in a few slides, but I don't actually plan to finish my thesis for my master's. It grew into a monster that requires a lot more time and energy than I have right now, which is why I'm pursuing a practicum as an internship to fulfill the MIRS capstone requirement instead. It also fulfills the Ford School's requirement for an internship. This is something that you'll have to think about if you're not sure about doing a practicum versus a thesis. Just something to consider if something in your research life changes, or in your personal life, if you decide you want to pursue a different career path. When I was thinking about this, I just looked at what I wanted my life to look like in 10 years, where I wanted to be. And I wanted to have that combination of research and field experience, but I didn't want to go directly into academia following graduation. So that is why I've chosen to do a practicum as well. Next slide, please. So I knew I wanted to bridge the gap between the humanities and the social sciences. So to support my thesis and a practicum, I've taken a variety of courses here at UM and at other institutions from fields such as history, anthropology, statistics, program evaluation, and Arabic. Fortunately, I've also been able to tailor my non-MINAS-centered classes to fit my research interests, both in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts and at the Ford School. So these here are just some of the examples of classes that I've taken, including public health, Arabic, and Middle Eastern studies. And that's something that I've been really grateful at this university, because there's not a lot of variety in some other institutions. Next slide, please. So language study. My spoken Arabic definitely isn't at a native or fluent level, so I studied abroad in Amman last summer at the Qasid Institute, where I continued in MSA, which is Modern Standard Arabic, and started learning Amiya, or colloquial Arabic, for the first time. I would 100% recommend undertaking a similar experience if you're interested in something like that, just because it is one of those things that you'll remember for the rest of your life. And I used a summer FLAS fellowship for that. Next slide, please. So from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to incorporate qualitative and quantitative methods into my research, so I took several courses to familiarize myself with both, such as the MIRS Research Design course and Comparative Perspectives on the Middle East. And these classes have helped me because, as you'll see in the next slide, my thesis was a bit much. Next slide, please. So structures and objectives. In my first year of grad school, I actually had a completely different thesis, but my experiences in that first semester completely changed my interests. So first, I knew I wanted to evaluate the humanitarian system and how it has developed since its inception. And that required doing historical research. But then I wanted to examine how Syrian refugees and other refugees in general, I guess, perceive of humanitarian aid based on who is providing it and if there's a preference. So I began survey design, and I looked into administering the survey through a hired team of researchers in Jordan, which requires funding through the form of research grants, both through the II and through Rackham. And then I realized that I needed to design the survey in both Modern Standard Arabic and Colloquial Arabic. And then if you can hit once. But that's a lot of work for 1 or 2 years, because hiring researchers and managing a project like that is something that I was not prepared to do after my first 1 or 2 semesters here at So that's where I've paused on data collection for now. And I'm looking at PhD programs and other opportunities like Fulbright, which is why I've switched to doing a practicum. And if we can go to the next slide. So these are just some of the aspects that I wanted my practicum to include. This is a diagram of the UN cluster approach system, which deals a lot with humanitarian response and emergency aid. This is the process I went through to actually find my internship. So because practicum requires a tighter timeline than a thesis, because you don't necessarily have the same year length, especially if you're doing a practicum in the summer. So the first thing I did was secure a practicum advisor. My practicum advisor is Ambassador Susan D. Page at the law school and at the Ford School. And then you have to determine your funding sources, such as FLAS or International Institute grants. And then just applying for different internships was something that I have found to be challenging, just because there are so many out there, but you also want to tailor them to fit your own interests. So these are all the these are some of the internships that I've applied for. And then following my completion this summer, I will write a reflection paper on how this practicum improved my studies and connected back to everything I do. And if we go to the last slide, thank you for listening. This probably wasn't what you were expecting from a lightning talk, but I enjoyed giving it, and I hope you guys got something out of it too.
Thank you so much, Kenna. We will now open the floor to questions. Again, if you have a particular question for Kenna, please feel free to drop that in the chat or to raise your hand and we'll call you out to unmute yourself.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So how did your experience in Jordan shape your interest in or the way that you think about potential avenues insofar as working abroad, doing humanitarian work abroad?
So my experiences in Jordan, it was wonderful, actually. I got to interact with so many more people from different backgrounds than I thought I would, because the program I was partaking in was internationally focused. So there were students from China, students from the UK, students from other part of the Middle East or North Africa. And you just got to connect with a lot of different people that way. And then by exploring the city with my friends that I made through that program, we were all exposed to things that we hadn't experienced before, because for a lot of us, it was our first time in the Middle East or even our first time abroad. And we got to see how people interact in that region of the world. We got to see how people live, and we even were able to do some volunteering opportunities for children in need or cleaning up neighborhoods that don't have the same services as the rest of the city. And that was something that really interested me, especially in recent days with US relations with other countries and communities being the way they are. I think it's more important than ever to emphasize the fact that working together and supporting your community is an important factor in just being human.
Thank you so much, Kenna. Are there any other questions or shall we move on to our fourth and final speaker? Oh, we have a question in the chat as well. Bailey Hightower has asked, you said you started work on your now paused thesis in your first year. Do you recommend doing the process?
Do you mean the process of starting my thesis in the first year or the part where I paused it? Okay, so I started my thesis my first year because I was in the MIRS research design course for the first 2 semesters of grad school. And as part of that course, you do a literature review and you compile your sources into an annotated bibliography. And you also make your thesis proposal. And at the end of my proposal process, during my first year, that is when I met with one of my research design professors and said, Jundai, this project looks massive. Would you recommend pausing this and looking at doing an internship, since I have to complete an internship anyway? And I knew I wanted at that point to complete a PhD. I just know now that I would also like to combine a career just outside of academia with a PhD so that I can kind of straddle that divide between research and broader work. So that is something that I was pondering at the end of my first year?
That's a great question. Thank you. There are no further questions. I think Briahna would like to introduce our fourth speaker.
All right. So our final speaker today is Josh Lyon, a third-year dual degree student pursuing the MIRS Chinese Studies specialization and a doctorate of nursing practice at the U of M School of Nursing. Josh's academic training and research focus on interconnecting the fields of nurse practitioners with Chinese history, philosophy, and the practice of health and illness in China. He is a NIOSH trainee with a specialty in occupational health and recently finished a short-term internship with the federal level of OSHA. Please join me in welcoming Josh for his talk titled A Practical and Ethnographic Study of the Contemporary Practice of Chinese Medicine.
My audio is on here now. Okay, I think the people who came before me did a really good job of explaining steps in the process. I'm currently in my second semester of the MIRS part, but as was just said, this is my third and my final year of my nurse practitioner side of things. So I plan on sticking around next year. So I'm in part 1 of 2 years of the MIRS. So I got this overlapping kind of thing going on. And it's useful for some people to probably understand that you might come in and say, I really want to do literature. And then you could go do that. But then some people come in and they say, I like doing public policy. And then they hear about this program, then they add that on. So it's a really flexible kind of way of doing things. I am also kind of unique because not a lot of nurses can do this kind of stuff. But when I came over to the II, I said, hey, I really like Chinese studies already. It's one of the reasons I came to U of M is because I said nursing is going to be my central path, but I knew there was this other stuff going on. And I didn't get into it in my first year, but I was able to add this on later. So that's kind of useful to know that a lot of these plans, they're all very flexible. And you can see all these different paths. So I think that's kind of good to know. And before I even get into my thing, I want to say like one quick thing that I didn't put in here, but might be kind of useful to know is when you do this project, since there's so many different things, I think it's also good to know there's like a study part and there's like a field work part. Some people might want to just hang out in archives all the time and say, I'm really interested. Even if it's a really like activist kind of thing, you might just say, I want to go learn about that political party. And there's a bunch of stuff in an archive somewhere. So it's still very study-ish. But then there's people like Caity who just said, hey, I went to this other country and I made this project in the summer. And you might see in mine, like I kind of knew that there might be, who knows, there might be problems that happen when you go do your summer project. And so I looked for making a couple sites to go to because you never know, even though like the doctor at this one clinic said I can come, somebody ends up retiring and then their schedules change or somebody gets pregnant, goes on leave or whatever. There's things that happen. And that's normal. And but people seem to be really cool about that in the program. Your advisors, whether they be your specific faculty advisor or the people in the specific office that are like more like the academic advisors. So I thought that would just be good to kind of reinforce what they said. I also wanted to say I'm a nurse practitioner. Some people aren't familiar with that. So I worked as a nurse for a number of years, just a normal nurse in a hospital. And I did that for like 10 years. So I'm kind of a traditional student, non-traditional student. And one thing I like about this program is we have so many different kinds of people that I don't feel out of place or anything. So if you're from another country, if you're not like 20 years old, you're 30 years old or whatever. There's just so many different kinds of people that I feel like you're going to be like finding people just like you and in all kinds of different forms. So I just wanted to say that at first because I was thinking that listening to other people's stuff and that wasn't in my little presentation. But I've been working on making my project and I wanted to show you the steps I'm going because this is what I'm going to be going and doing within a month and a half from now, 2 months from now. So can you go to the next slide? Just the steps in this, I'm going to breeze through this real quick, but an introduction to what my project is, because like was mentioned before, I really was I've been interested in Chinese studies for a while, but I didn't know Chinese medicine. And I said, that would make a lot of sense to learn that if I want to bridge my interests. And everything about this process has been really super conducive. If you want to put in the creative energy and the efforts to do it, I've had a lot of people say, go for it, right? And so I'll go through the introduction, the design, the sites. I'm not going to go through all the details, but I'll just show you like the thought process that went into when I'm trying to put this project together, the timeline. I did over winter break. I went over there and I visited places to see like what they were like, because I'll get to that. And then just a sample of like the ethnography part of things and a sample of the practice goals that I've come up with. And then what it meant for me to do literature review is different than others. And so we'll move on. Next slide, please. So I really wanted to do this because I said, well, I'm a nurse, now a nurse practitioner. Nurse practitioner is considered an advanced practice nurse. So we're still nurses. We're still legally nurses. I can't call myself a doctor in the sense of like doctor in a hospital. I'm not allowed to do that, even if like I have a doctorate degree. It's kind of confusing. But my role as a nurse practitioner is kind of more like a doctor, if you want to put it done simply. So to me, I thought, how could I get hands-on practice in something? Because I know I could find it. I knew people, but how could I put that together? And how could I, also recognizing that, like, unlike rotation in medical school or nursing school, where, you work under a doctor and they let you just go and they let you do stuff. I'm like, well, I'm not trained in that area. So what could I also do? And so I ended up coming to this hybrid project, which involves this kind of ethnographic part. So there's some part where I can learn stuff hands-on, some part where it's a kind of research project. Okay, and next slide, please. As I mentioned, the hybrid aspect of things, I don't really neatly fit into one box or two. And as people have said, things change to the program. And I've also had that. I've said, do I count as a practicum and do I count hours like an internship? Well, I'm not really doing an internship with a boss in a place, but I am going to be with people and working. But despite that, I feel like we all have these stories, but things work out. And I get support from everyone. No one is saying like you are cut off because things changed and you didn't realize that. I've had everybody say, that's fine, we'll work through this. So it's kind of good to know that in advance. And one result of my project too was also to say, not just like what are the perspectives of people, but how could this potentially influence my practice or other people's practices in terms of like when I go work in clinics in the future, which is what I plan to do. So next slide, please. So I put together the schedule for the summer. I'm not going to go through all the details of it because we don't have time for that, and I don't want to bore you too much. But I found 2 standard clinics to go to and doctors there who said, yeah, I can follow them. I can, more than shadow, there's things if I want to learn how to do things, they let me to the extent that that's possible. And the second clinic it's a clinic, but it's a Gong Fu master, and he does Chinese medicine. And all of these were friends of friends who said that they knew somebody. And that's why I went and I visited them over winter break, because I said, I need to be able to figure out how I can form this in that process of putting it together. And so next slide, please. Just to show you some of these people. The first clinic, he took me out to dinner, the doc there. As a kind of funny side note, he said, you have an open door policy. You can come back anytime you want, as long as every so often on Thursdays, he likes to drink Galion. So he likes to take you on. And so it's kind of funny. There's this practical side of when you go out in the field and how you negotiate with people, how you work with people. Dr. Wu is still willing to do stuff with me, but she changed clinics. And so I'm still really going to be able to go there, but these kind of things happen in the field. Next slide, please. I went to go visit the Gong Fu master. He has like an in-office clinic in the city of the center. I can follow him, but he has a retreat where he does these intensive, almost month-long workshops where it all falls within the realm of Chinese medicine, even though it's not what I think of as a nurse that comes from the US. And I brought this back to my advisor, and she just gave me these other sources. There's people like me who've done this before, and they've also met these kind of practitioners. And it was interesting because, sometimes the way we categorize things in different traditions don't line up the same way. And this was the most unorthodox way, I'd say. So I'm kind of excited to go there and learn his perspectives and what he teaches. You can go to the next slide. He does his practice on a mountain, actually, and that's where he does his workshops. And you will live there if you go to his intensive thing. And so I was able to go hang out with him for 2 days of a break, and we stayed on the mountain. And he does his Gong Fu practice. And in addition to like moxibustion, acupuncture, he teaches a lot of things to lay people. So that's part of my program. The next slide, please. And I just want to give you a quick sample. So when I came back, I said, okay, I'm not necessarily asking a question no one else has ever thought of in the whole universe. But if I'm a clinician, how can I do research? And when I talked to my advisor, she said, don't think about this from a scientific perspective, like is Chinese medicine good or bad, true or false, valid, not valid. You can get in that whole, that's a different direction. Just look at this from a kind of anthropological, ethnographic point of view and ask, why do these people, I'm going to have plenty of patients that I'll see, ask them why they're pursuing this. And then we can start drawing conclusions from that. And also, what is Chinese medicine? Because that's a very broad topic. So next slide, please. Just some more examples of questions. You can go to the next one. And some more. Keep it short. Those are just examples of things. And when you do this kind of questions too, you prepare like a sample guide of questions you'll propose. But things will deviate a little bit. Next slide, please. And I also came up with a list of practice goals that I'd like to achieve. Again, I'm not trained in this, but this will be things that I can learn in the workshop or with the doctors I go with. That's part of the practicum kind of part of things. Because like in Chinese medicine, they diagnose things differently, but they also use different methods of pulse feeling. Both of the clinics said I can learn how they prepare medications in their pharmacy. They have like an herbal pharmacy. Next slide, please. And the very end here. So when I did literature review, like it was said before, when you take like a research design class, you say, okay, let's do literature and what has literature been said. And mine kind of doesn't fit the same way because it's got this practice side. And so when I talked with my advisor, we said, let's come up with themes that can inform what you will go look into. And so mine was more like looking into what, there are a lot of Westerners who've done Chinese medicine, become scholars in it, do anthropology. And so you can look at that question, like the third one, what are those people and what have they said and done? How can you use that as a model? Processes of hybridization on a large level and on your individual practice level, and also just the notion of the patient encounter, how there's a difference between what I'm used to in a clinic here and how that works in Chinese medicine. And so that's how I didn't give you all the stuff in there, but so that's how my literature works, but it might be very different than someone who studies stuff, with refugees, for example, in another country. And that's it. Close there.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was really interesting. Are there any questions for Josh?
I have one question, which is to say, how do you see, first off, this project looks super fascinating. In particular, I'd be really interested to see how or whether Chinese traditional medicine will feature into the work that you're doing as a PhD student in the School of Nursing. And if so, what kind of form might that take?
This is a really good question. I think the most simple way to answer it, I think, which is why when I talked to my advisor and she said, don't come into this side of things with the scientific mindset, like you're thinking like a chemistry and pathophysiology and blah, blah, blah. Think about it from like humanities, which is why I like this program, because that's something that I don't do if I'm not in this program. And so by doing something like ethnography, I think on a very, very simple level, I could say I get better at subjective inquiry, things like qualitative process. I literally never learn anything about qualitative processes when I do stuff over there in the nursing school. It's all about charts and graphs and numbers and turning everything numbers. But when you think about it, when you meet a doctor in a clinic or something like that, it's discussions, and it's how do you assess people and size up their condition and their temperament, and in addition to, of course, numbers on papers. But so that would be like a really simple example is on a very practical level. I think it can influence that. And another one is that's going to be another stage of this project. Like I go to the global health office and they say, oh, people are interested in, and when they do study abroads, they go to a Western style hospital in another country and go see a nurse or a doctor and see what they do. They don't, this is it's a different system. So that's been done somewhat. I don't know how that's going to fold out. Like that'll be like a result of this process too, I think. So that's a long answer to that. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions for Josh?
Okay. Well, that concludes our presentations. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today for the International Institute Graduate Student Lightning Talks. We hope you enjoyed learning about the interesting work that our students have undertaken. I know I'm always amazed to hear how bright and accomplished you all are. So many thanks to each of you for sharing your experiences with us. Please join me in one last virtual round of applause. And thank you. That concludes our event. Visiting students, I know that there may be a few more items in your itineraries. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your preview experience. Please let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Bye.